Hey everyone, welcome to our 6th annual Border Book Bash. I'm Margarita Longoria, and today, right now, we have our Guys Read, Guys Write panel. And I have some amazing gentlemen writers that are joining us today. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time. If Danny's supposed to be here too, but I'll add him if he comes in late. So I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're tuning in from and a little bit about the books you write. Starting with Javi.
Hey, hello, my name is Javier Garza. I'm originally from the Rio Grande Valley, born in McAllen, raised in Rio Grande City. I've been living in San Antonio for going on 22 years. And I guess I write a lot of books that deal with cucuys and lucha libre, Mexican wrestling, adventure stories, if you will, and kind of some people have called it boy books because of the whole superhero genre. But like that's been my growing up. That's been one of my big loves: superheroes and monsters. So that's kind of like a lot of the books that I do revolve around those two.
Awesome. And yes, your little. I remember whenever you were in my first Border Book Bash ever. You and Jason, 6 years ago here in Mission. We had it in Alton, and I remember whenever I asked for my designer to design a poster for me. I was telling him, this is what I want, and I want all this stuff, and then I wanted the lucha libre, the mask, and that's the biggest. That's like right in the center of the poster, and it's awesome. It always reminds me of you.
Yeah, I texted or emailed you back that is the most awesome poster I have ever seen. That was so cool.
It is. I love it. It's my favorite. Okay, so Manny, next, please.
Okay, hi, my name is Manuel Ruiz. I am originally from the Corpus Christi area, born in Alice, Texas, but grew up in Robstown, home of Texas Hold'em. But I currently live in Round Rock, Texas, just north of Austin. I've been here 20 plus years. Most of the stuff I write is supernatural based, some light horror, middle grade. I started with middle grade. This is the Dead Club. This is my series that it's a 3-book series, and it's about a kid who dies, wakes up in the afterlife, and finds out he's there with 4 other kids, and they end up they find out that the underworld is broken, and they're brought there to find out why. So they're kind of like these dead superheroes, basically, is what it is. And it's middle grade, but it's like anything else. I've got readers up to adults. I've got a book called Lobo Coronado and the Legacy of the Wolf that was a standalone, similar, supernatural, a little more magic mixed in. And then I've also got my new book. It's only been out a little while, less than a couple of months, and it's called The Sugar Skull. This is my first YA book that is also kind of horror. It's a little deeper. It's high school kids. Kids are going to be seniors, and how they're dealing with this mysterious sugar skull that shows up in the life of one of the boys and just changes everything. And so it's going to be 3 books. Book 2 will be out by probably February, and if all goes well, book 3 will be out by before summer. So I'll have all 3 out within a year. And then I also do write some short stories. The first one I actually had published was in Sanitarium magazine just earlier this year. And so that's the kind of stuff I write.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Manny.
Oh, you're welcome.
And Jason, I'm so happy to see you again.
I know. I'm so happy to see you. And I'm living in Colorado now. And I haven't been to the Border Bash in a couple of years.
Jason used to be a Texan.
That's right. My name is Jason Henderson. I grew up in Central Texas. And my first middle grade series, Alex Van Helsing, was on the Texas Lone Star list, and that was how I met Ms. Longoria and all the wonderful people coming down to the Border Bash. And that writer community was so wonderful, and I miss it a great deal. So I can't wait to get back to Texas. I write all kinds of stuff. My most recent series is Young Captain Nemo, which is a 3-book series about an adventurer boy with his submarines saving the planet. And I also run a small press called Castle Bridge Media, and we do anthologies, especially like the Castle of Horror anthology series. And Trisha Hoover actually was our editor on this one because it was all women authors. And we're going to be doing in 2022 an LGBTQ collection, and I think I found an editor because it wouldn't make sense representationally for me to edit that one. So if it's something where where I don't represent, I'm always looking for another editor to take on the curating and editing and I'm so happy about that, because it's giving me opportunity to give other writers avenues, and so that's been a blast. Anyway, that's me.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that you were the force behind that anthology, because I have a couple of friends in that anthology, and I know, because I think it was Trisha that was
right. Well, we
promoting
tapped
it. I didn't
Trisha,
realize it was you.
and she just ran with it and put it together, right? But I'm the co-publisher for Castle Bridge Media.
I bought it. I actually have a copy here at home.
No kidding. Oh, I'm so glad.
Congratulations.
I'm glad to hear that. That's great.
That's fun. Okay. So I wanted to put this particular panel together because I am a boy mom. And I know sometimes people like to say that, and I have, my sons are night and day.
Yeah.
One loves to read, has always been a reader, always, and one that's kind of like, you know, and then like he doesn't like, my mom's a librarian, you know, like kind of like, oh my God, like why does my mom, like one of them, Michael was always excited, my mom's a librarian, and the other one's like, oh, my mother's a librarian, you know, because they're just not the same when it comes to the love of books. So as a high school librarian also, and as a mother of boys, I'm always looking for books that would appeal to boys, and not necessarily because all books are for everyone. Mm-hmm. I hate whenever, we shouldn't say girl books, boy books, but you know, there are some books that appeal more to one genre. I mean, one gender and one, you know, there are. So as I'm always looking for that book that has an appeal for boys, because boys are kind of our little reluctant reader people. You know, we have a little bit more time, a little bit harder time with them than we do with girls normally in the book world. So tell me or tell us here what you think guys like in books, and what teachers, librarians, and parents should look for in books when we're looking for books for our boys. Javi?
Oh, well, you know, like with me, one thing, like the whole thing about boys don't like to read. They do like to read. They just like to read subjects that they themselves find appealing. Now, here's the thing, though. It's not all like it's not all action. It's not all just adventure or monsters. You know, one thing about it is I've taught junior high for like 28 years. Mm-hmm. So I see like when I'm writing a young adult book, I look at the way the kids act, and I kind of try to incorporate it. And I think into the stories, I think when kids read the story, they get it because they are part of it. It's like when I described the 6th grade dance one time. The 6th grade dance, it's like you have the music is playing full blast. You got the boys on one side of the room. You got the girls on the other side. Boys are too young for liquid courage, like they say. Yeah. But they're all daring each other to go and ask the girl to dance. And you go. And the girls are over there. They want to dance till eventually they get tired of waiting for the boys and they start dancing themselves, you know, together. And so I kind of try to incorporate that. And I think kids get it. It's like, because it's something that they'll read it and they know that that's the way they would react. That's the way they would see themselves in those characters. Like this in one of the books, there's like you gotta ask the girl to the dance. You don't ask her to the dance, somebody else will, and all this. She's waiting for you to ask her. You gotta ask her. And finally, you know, under pressure, he asks, and after he asks, she says yes, and he realizes there's just one problem with his whole plan. Don't know how to dance. Right. And he says, he's left with two options, because his friends that were daring him to do it, telling him he needed to do it, they don't know how to dance either. So he has like two options. He says he could either learn, he could ask his mother, which would raise too many questions altogether, because she'd want to know, well, why do you need to learn how to dance? And who is this girl? And so he's left with only one other option. And a lot of kids, a lot of boys first learn how to dance from the last person they want, but they're left with no option, their older sister. Mm-hmm. You know, and her friends. And you might say, oh, cool, you're dancing with all these girls, right? Yeah, but they're her friends. You become this little test subject that they're just kind of, trying to teach how to. You become a project to them.
You know, great, by the way.
Yeah, you become a project to them, And so, I try to incorporate stuff like that into the stories because I think guys, well, they want to read about stuff like that because it's situations that are real. They're real to them. And in one book, well, in the Maximilian, there's a scene where, he starts bragging about that he has a car. It's not really, I mean, it's going to be his car down the road, but he doesn't really know how to have a license or anything. And he starts bragging about it, and one thing leads to another, and he ends up taking the girl for a ride in his car. And of course, it's like he says, "Well, do you want me to take you for a ride?" And he's thinking she's not gonna say yes. I mean, what kid would go for a ride with another kid in the car?
Mm-hmm.
And then when she says yes, he's like, "Oh shoot, I've done it now," because now he's done it. He has to do it. And kids get themselves into situations like that all the time. And I think if you combine that into the story together with throwing some wrestlers, throwing some monsters, and throw in adventures and throw in situations like that, they'll read it because and they'll find it humorous and they'll find it real. Because, like I said, I've taught for 28 years and I've seen all kinds of situations kids get into, and what's funny about it is like they say, "Well, how do you know all this?" He goes, "Because they tell you."
Yeah, they do.
They'll tell you. You're like, "Okay, look, I really don't want to hear." No, sir, but let me tell you. No, it's okay. I don't want to know. But no, but, and they want to tell somebody, and they like you and trust you enough to want to tell you.
Yeah.
And then you tell them all right off the bat, okay. First of all, is this anything I'm going to have to report to the counselor?
Yes.
No. There's nothing like that. Okay, then tell me. But if there's anything in there that's bad, I have to report it. It's like, and so I have that luck that I see that world 5 days out of the week, and so I'll be honest. I take a lot of those situations and I put them in there.
That's great. That's cool.
That is great. Like, I was thinking, like, because it's true. Some of these kids, they want to tell you stuff, and you're like, oh my God. Like, I'm gonna have to call the police at the end of this conversation. But yeah, that's amazing, and that says a lot about you as a teacher that they want to tell you their stories, because some of these kids are hard shells too, especially boys to crack. Okay, Manny.
Okay, so same thing. I don't want to generalize, but at the same time, it's an honest question. I'm the oldest of three boys, and I've only raised a son and a nephew, so primarily boys. But here's the thing: within the content of it, I think dialogue has a lot to do with it. I've written middle grade and I've written high school, and the newer books are going to be main characters that are in college. But a big thing is the dialogue. A realistic thing, when I grew up, I was a smart ass. I mean, it was just a matter of you insult each other and you're trying to out insult each other and that kind of thing. So the dialogue has to be kind of natural. And, I was also a baseball coach for a long time. So I got to and got to see what a lot of kids do. And it wasn't that I wrote the books thinking, I want this to appeal to boys. I want it to appeal to everyone. But so I use that a lot through the dialogue and the way the guys interact. But this came through a story through a middle grade English teacher and as well as a librarian. They came back and said, well, here's the thing. The content's great, but you got to get them to read that in the first place. So they came back and they told me we had the English teacher, especially, she said, I had a kid, big kid, just behavioral problem, never stopped talking, never stopped messing up, always in trouble. And then I got your book in my class. And if you look at the close, check out the thing. It's got a really cool car on it.
Huh.
It's got the Grim Reaper on it with a really cool scythe. That wasn't my intention. I just thought I got the cover design, worked with the designer because I thought it was a cool cover. Well, the boy saw that, read the back of the book. You know how they always tell you, hey, that's why you talk about it. You have to have a great cover. That's kind of your main thing. This was a living, breathing example. He saw that, saw the cool car, saw the death thing and read about it and read, okay, these are like dead superheroes. So boom, superheroes appealed to him. The car appealed to him. And all of a sudden this kid, she said, I didn't have a problem with him for almost 6 weeks because what I would tell him is if you behave the whole class, I'll give you 5-10 minutes and you can read the book at the end of class.
Wow.
Boom. And then the librarian was a similar story, saying she had some boys that like they did a presentation or I had gone or they talked about it. and they said they had boys that have never come checked out a book other than what they had to, and they were checking out my books because it's just the concept of it was something that just appealed to them. The superhero element, the car element, there's I forget the author's name, but he writes a bunch of books that usually have a baseball theme, something like that. And as long as it appeals to them, but the cover and the idea are going to want to get them to look at the book, and then hopefully with them to get to the content, like how Xavier was saying, something cool, wrestling, that kind of that stuff, just awesome. The Van Helsing books, I think that's a really cool idea, Jason. I've seen your books, I know of your books, so I saw that, and that appealed to the little boy in me. I was like, ooh, I want to read this, And so as long as it appeals to something like that, I think that'll, once you get them past that initial door, which that doorway may be the cover and then the back, and it'll actually get them into it, and hopefully the content relates to them as well.
And I think it is really important to try to appeal to boys, because everybody, I feel like, they need to have books to read. Everybody needs to have a book to read that they can relate to, that they can love. And I don't think there's anything, and I don't believe the myth that boys don't like to read. Like, that's a big myth. Like, oh, boys don't like to read. Yes, they do. Like, I have one, and my little one now, the reason he didn't like to read was because he couldn't read. Like, he had problems learning to read. My mother, we sent him to a different school, and my mom, now he can read. So now he gets books. He's going to be 8 next month. And now he'll get books, and he'll say, my mom wrote a book. Like, he's really excited about books now because he can read the book, and it's not like before he couldn't read them. So he didn't like them. He was like, oh, the books are dumb, mom, like whatever. My mom's like, real annoyed with me. But I think it makes a big difference whenever they have something that they can relate to, and then they can read it themselves. They pick it themselves. They read it themselves. And that's very important, I feel, for boys. Okay, for everybody. Jason.
I struggle with this a lot, and I struggle with this as a grown boy, is because I think one of the biggest problems with getting boys to read is that no matter how exciting a book is, it requires a quieting. You have to actually engage in doing it, and in trying to turn off the noise around you, and sort of, in my mind, there's an event horizon that you trip over and into when you start reading, and then you're in it. And once you're in it, you can stay there for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But being able to just get into the moment where you can quiet everything around you, or at least turn off everything around you and read, it's so hard. And it's hard for me as an adult. I'll speak for myself. It's hard for me as an adult to turn off the TV, to turn off the noise, and engage in it. I mean, what kind of stuff? I really loved what Manny and Xavier said about, the content needing to be relevant. Although I know that for me as a kid, I loved fantasy of being better at everything than I actually was. So I read James Bond books. They didn't really have middle grade novels when I was a kid, but I would read James Bond novels and Man from U.N.C.L.E. tie-in books and stuff like that, which were 20 years old at the time. And so I write stuff like that. I write books where these middle grade kids act like they're about 30 and like they already have several advanced degrees, and they're so confident and everything. And that's by choice. I deliberately make it like that because I know that there are some kids who will love the fantasy of knowing the right thing to say and being able to figure stuff out, having more confidence than I actually had when I was a actual 12-year-old. But boy, I don't, it breaks my heart because I don't know how to overcome the noise of the world, not just for kids, but for myself as well, and to make time to read. And I'd love to know, you as educators, if you have any advice for that, because don't you think that that's one of the biggest problems?
One of the biggest problems is to try, even me as a librarian nowadays, I don't know if it's the current climate we're in, or maybe because I'm so busy at this particular point in my life, but to sit down with a book, it takes I really need to be okay, I'm going to sit down and read today, because there is so much going on. And then, like you said, to quiet your mind at a time where everything is still so uncertain and everything's a little bit scary, and everything's scary right now, guys. I still can't get over how we're still in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And how we're all vaccinated, or most of us, hopefully, and then we still have these new variants. And do we, with this book festival, I wanted to be live this year. I thought last year was, I was like, no, we'll do live. But then still with all these, new variants coming in, people still a little bit not sure if they want to travel like that, you know what? We'll just do it virtual again, and hopefully next year we can be live again at the beach. Like I'm telling everybody it's at the beach, so I'm gonna have to figure it out. Because I think we all need a beach vacation.
Yes.
Yeah, we still need to have that great big gathering for your book.
Yes,
With all of you. Still need that great big gathering of everybody there.
I was talking to, because Dominic, where is he? He's in Bolivia. Okay, and he was in my last panel, and I was like, he was like, you say it, and I'll be there. So I'm really gonna think about like plan something, because he's the one that's the furthest away that's in the anthology. But I just feel that we are at a weird time, and so to make time to just enjoy life and enjoy a book is hard for a lot of people right now, and that makes me sad too.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to ask another question that you all. Tell us what kind of a teen boy you were.
Me, I really discovered like my love of reading, I guess, when I was like late elementary, when I was like in third grade. I think it was third grade, because I'll tell you where I discovered my love of reading as a kid was the bookmobile. We had the bookmobile that came to our school.
Yeah.
You kind of, but that led to when I was in junior high. Just I love to read. I mean, I would go to the library, check out 2 books, but that was the limit, and then I would take him. Couple of days later, I would bring him back, get another one, and that just carried on. But to high school. I mean, I always, I guess the term would be I was a library kid. I would go to the library quite a bit. I did. I had my friends. We hung out. We did all this stuff. But I always enjoyed going to the library and just getting a book and looking at it, checking it out, my son now does the same thing, which I think is great. He gets when he needs his me time, he puts it. He goes to the library, and then he'll get books that I think I'll look at it like philosophy. What's he doing? It's like, and he'll just read, and he what do you call it? But it was just so growing up as I guess reading was a big part of it. I was in other sports. I was in karate. I was in other stuff growing up. With my friends, did pretty much everything that you do. Now, one thing that I did have was, as I mentioned this in other panels, I grew up with storytelling a lot as a kid. So I would write it down. I would write down stories that I would hear. I would write down stories that I made up. But I mean, I really didn't think of writing a book till I was older. But I mean, like I said, I grew up surrounded by family all the time. My grandparents were there, my aunts, my uncles, cousins, and so I, in that sense, it's like I was never really alone, so to speak. So you kind of have to make that time where you just get a book and read. But it was like I wasn't I wasn't a troublemaker, mainly because I never got caught. Like they say, we all do things that we're grateful our parents never found out about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I had the gift of not getting caught. But and which is why a lot of that stuff that I did is a lot of especially the young adult books. A lot of what stuff that we did is during those years, I put them in the books. I put them in there as part of the story. Yes, when me and my cousin Bobby were little, we did sneak out of Grandpa's house, and we really did go to the cornfields in the back, hunting for monsters late at night when it was dark. And so I incorporate all that into books.
Were you scared of Malachi? Every time I think of cornfields, I think of Malachi.
Children of the Corn made us stop that.
Yes, I know. Thank you.
Yeah, Children of the Corn made us think twice of going to those cornfields again.
Can I just point out something about Children of the Corn? Because y'all were talking about Children of the Corn in the last panel. And do you guys notice? Manny and Javier, I really think that we didn't have Halloween corn mazes until after that movie came out.
Really?
Like, I don't remember any community having a corn maze until after the mid '80s and that film. Which is so funny to think that this cheap, I mean decent but cheap movie based on a Stephen King short story created this weird thing that now happens at Halloween time. You know.
Yeah.
That movie scared the bejesus
Yeah,
out
it
of
was.
me. Like,
That was a
to
good
this day. I mean,
time
now
it was good.
Yeah.
it looks crazy now.
Oh no, I have complete respect for it. I'll watch it today. We can put it on right now. I'm fine. You know. Yeah.
But the effects are so terrible. You're like, really? Was I that scared?
These effects are
The
very
camera
special.
work is like, but it was a stressful movie.
Mhm.
You know, you watched it and you came out stressed. It was like, and then the music, it's like
Yeah.
that whole bit was just.
And you don't meet a lot of Malachis. Whenever I meet a Malachi, when there's a Malachi in my school, I'm like, why did your mom name you Malachi?
Why would your parents name you after a weirdly teenaged cultist? Yes, like.
But yes. Okay, next person with your answer your question.
Okay, so growing up, I was very extroverted, loud. I was an all A student. I was kind of a nerd, but I also was a musician. I learned to play guitar when I was pretty young, and I've been in an '80s band with my brother for. We had a home rhythm section. I was a bass player. I learned guitar, but I learned bass and played in the jazz band when I was older. And so he was the drummer. So we've had a built-in family rhythm section, and I've been playing in an '80s band for the last 5-6 years called Freeze Frame, and we still play a lot here in Central Texas. So we have a great time and enjoy that. I was into my hometown, Robstown, is a big baseball town. I didn't start picking up till I was later. I love baseball, but I was never good enough because, man, some of these kids started at 4, 5. I didn't start till I was older, but I loved playing it. We used to mow down an empty lot in our neighborhood, so all the neighborhood kids would go play ball over the summer, and we play street ball, football in the neighborhoods. But I was really into music, video games, girls. I mean, I had Atari, I had a Nintendo. Those were my main things, and I was just playing God of War last night on my PlayStation 5. So I'm still into video games. I'm still into music. Some of that stuff never went away. My Nintendo Switch, I love it. And I was just and I read all the time. I read from when I was younger. A Wrinkle in Time was my first big favorite book. It was my favorite book for the longest time when I was younger, and until I found Stephen King and I found Anne Rice, and I was just the type that was like now I talk fast, I talk a lot, and I'd get in trouble for that mostly in school. But I was, I loved hanging out with my friends, and that was just kind of the way I was when growing up. And I was always reading a book. In fact, I remember I took summer school one time when Stephen King's It first came out, and I was still fairly younger, and that was a huge book. It was the longest book at the time that I had ever read. And so my friends would look at me like, what are you doing? Because every time between classrooms, I'm sitting there and I'm reading. And that was just kind of my thing. Sometimes I'd take books to school if I had the time that weren't, my schoolwork. But especially in summer. And it was just something I always did. I was always writing stories and always reading all the time. I would go to the library all the time, same as you were saying, Xavier, and just a big thing with me. And that's that was pretty much it.
That's awesome. The other day, Michael, he just turned 16, so he's going to test for his license next week. Finally, he's going to be able to drive by himself. But so far, it's just he has to drive with me, right? So we still go to school together. And I'm waiting for him, like, after football practice. And so now it's track, right? So, and powerlifting. So I was waiting for him after school because we live far from the school. And he never comes. I'm like, oh, hurry. I'm like, why are we doing track? What are you doing? He's like, Mom, I'm in track for the food and the girls. And I look at him, I'm like, really, dude? Because I'm here until 7:00 at night because you want, like if I don't feed him, he's like, I'm here for the food and the girls. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's the way band was. Band was a boys and girls. It was co-ed.
Priorities.
And here I am wanting to go home. I'm like, I can't wait till he has his license. And he can go in his own car.
Yeah. Give him a high five for me.
Jason?
I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s. And so it just depends. I went to 3 different high schools and I tried on all kinds of different identities. So I started out as like an overweight bookworm, and then somewhere I got into like drama at a different high school, and I was really athletic and wearing all kinds of Chess King clothes and with the big double-breasted bolero jackets and all that stuff. You can't wear those unless you have like a 28-inch waist. I mean, and it, you know,
we need
it's
pictures.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Good luck with that. So the I struggle because when I think, I instantly, the mirror splinters into many, many different versions of the teenage self. I still loved reading. I really wanted to write comic books. In high school was when I suddenly decided that I really I wanted to write, and I wanted to write comics and get into that. And I was just beginning to understand how darn hard it was to get the attention of like editors and stuff like that. But I do remember that was the point that I was already turning my attention towards, how does this writing thing work, and how do you get your work out there, and how do you start to deal with rejection and all that. But yeah, it was Texas, it was hot, and it was the 80s, so you can fill in the blanks and all that. Boy, I miss chess King, don't you? I mean, I miss
about that forever. I grew up in the 80s too, so yeah, Chess King. Oh
yeah,
man.
80s.
Yeah. Yeah,
hey, but we had really good music.
Oh yeah, no, sure. But people imagine that if they just blink, if they walked through the door and they accidentally got out in 1986, they imagine that all the music would be perfect and it'd be, oh look, Depeche Mode. I'm like, no, half the time you're going to be listening to the Jets. Honestly, half the time it's going to be stuff that you're probably not going to play past 1992, and that's okay.
The 80s were a great time to grow up, I think. The music was good, and the clothes were terrible. Like, I look back at some of the things we wore, and I'm like, why was that
the hair.
fashion?
The hair.
The hair.
The hair.
I wore a pair of parachute pants one time, and I said, that's not me. I wore them once and only once.
I can find an 80s picture with some 80s fashion. I will share it with you.
Oh my God, do it, Jason.
In this actual thing, but let us continue, and if I find some, I will share it with you.
Find some Jordan.
Do you have any advice for young writers, boys in particular, who might want to write but kind of feel a little bit like it's not a real guy thing to do?
Well, the thing with writing, with especially like with boys, I would tell them is, if you don't think it's a guy thing to do, then make it be a guy thing to do. Make tell the stories from your perspective, especially if they're like teenagers and what have you. Because I remember David Rice once said, we have a bunch of 30, 40, 50-year-old people writing books about how 18, 16, 15, 14, 12-year-olds act.
Yeah.
And he said, they're going to know. Who's going to know more about how the way a 12, 13, 14-year-old acts than an actual kid that age? So he said, just write down your stories, put them down on paper. And that's what I tell them, write down your stories, put them down on paper. It doesn't matter if it doesn't quite sync the way you want it to, because once you have it down on paper, then you go back and you mess with it.
Yes.
You edit it, make it better and better and better. And the story you start with might not be the story you end up with, and that's perfectly normal. I tell them, because you yourself, the kid you are today, is not the person you're going to be when you leave junior high. And when you get to high school, the person you're there is not the person you're going to be when you finish high school. And when you go to college, the person that goes in is not the person that comes out. And because you're developing, you're learning, and as long as you keep working on your stories, I mean, they're going to develop too. They're going to grow. And they'll change because you're getting older, you're experiencing life, and in that sense, it makes your stories more real in that sense, because it doesn't always have to have a happy ending, because it becomes a more realistic take on life, and it just your experiences will inevitably go find their way into your work. And that's what I tell them, just to keep writing, and if you're I do advise them this. I tell them, if you're writing a story, have 2 or 3 stories. You have 2 or 3 stories going on at the same time, because you can't get stuck on one, and you leave it alone, go to the other one, and next thing you know, all of a sudden, you're ready to go back, because the getting stuck on the story is real. I tell them, and you can make a skeleton. You can like, wait, this is the way it's gonna go. But sometimes the story doesn't want to follow that particular step, and that's all right. Because maybe the story is trying to tell you something. And so that's kind of like the advice I give them, just to keep writing. And
I think that's great advice. Manny?
So I'm going to get on my mini soapbox for this. National Novel Writing Month. I've been doing it for over 5 years. And I tell anyone, if you've done that, because they have programs for youth, they have program for anybody. The goal of this, every November, you're trying to write 50,000 words in a month. I know that sounds impossible to a lot of folks, but the point is, even if you only write 1,000 words, even if you write 500 words, that's 500, 1,000 words you didn't have, October 31st. Yeah. So I always encourage people to do it. It's NaNoWriMo.org. You just look it up and it's free. It doesn't do anything. So if you want to write, use that. And twice a year, they also have a camp. The camp, you can do whatever you want. You can say, you know what, I'm going to write 5,000 words, or I'm just going to edit whatever I'm going to do. But it gives you a goal and it gives you a deadline. So you can kind of say, hey, I want to do this. And it doesn't matter. The point isn't to win. The point is to do something and get it down, because you can do that on your own. You're not going to submit it to anybody. You're not going to show it to anybody, but you can write it on your own. You can keep it to yourself until it's ready. And like Javier was saying, the first draft is a trash draft. You write it as fast. Again, my opinion, I know there's a very small amount of writers that can write perfect, from beginning to end, the Mozarts of writing, but usually it's a draft. You're just throwing words out there. And there's a lot of free resources online on YouTube, whatever. I recommend that. A lot of folks will talk about The Writer's Journey by Vogler. That's a great book, but it's a lot to digest. So there's stuff like Dan Brown. Dan Brown has a story circle, which kind of took that and made it a little simpler. He writes Rick and Morty. He wrote Community. And the story circle is something I use more than The Writer's Journey, because sometimes,
Wait, is that a book? I apologize.
The story circle is not a book. It's a concept. But if you look it up online, it's referenced by a lot of folks. There's actually a diagram of it.
That's interesting. I've never.
Yeah,
I'm totally interested.
I started off with the Writer's Journey
on this that I.
Yeah, but Dan Brown's story circle, it was referenced by another big writer, Chris Fox. It was something that I read a lot about Chris Fox, who talks about, who he helped me, do like word sprints, that kind of thing. But he referenced it a lot, and so I looked into it, and it's just it's a simpler version of The Writer's Journey. Same with Save the Cat. Save the Cat writes a novel. Save the Cat was originally for screenwriters. So was the story circle, but it can be applied to novels, and I've used both of those. I use a version of the story circle and beats and that kind of thing to you for my last 3 or 4 books. That's what I've used. Initially, it was just The Writer's Journey. And again, it's a lot to digest, but a lot of these resources are free. They're online, or they're books that aren't very expensive, but online resources, there's a ton of them. NaNoWriMo is a big one, just to give you a deadline, to give you an objective and to write. Again, it's okay if the stuff's not great. That's what a first draft is supposed to. Just like you learn in English class. Your first draft is just, you write it. It's got to be fixed. Write it, get it done, get the words down, because that's the hardest part. So many people say, oh, I'm going to go to these conferences, I'm going to do this, I'm going to read that book, and they never sit down to actually write. There's a point, and this is personal as well. I got to a point where I was going to so many conferences, I said, I kind of probably should start writing now, And so you get it down, write it, and then use that information to make it better, make it better, make it better. We were discussing this earlier, but I would, when I talk to classes sometimes, I talk about Batman. Batman's been around since the 30s. How many different iterations of Batman have there been on TV and the movies? Yet there's still new comics. There's 5 or 6 different lines of comics. In fact, I'm going to show you this is one of the coolest things. Frank Miller's Batman.
Oh, beautiful.
Is the reason I got into comic books. I read comics when I was
Robin, right?
Spider-Man, Archie. But Frank Miller's Batman was gritty. It was different. It was a set of graphic novels that came out in the late 80s. And that is what got me heavy into comics. And so the thing is, you can take those different stories, and this Frank Miller was a completely different take on Batman. So you can take something you love. If you love Pokemon, if you love Batman, if you love whatever, take that story, but write your own story with those same characters. Use that as a building block. And then that character can be somebody else. You can't call him Bruce Wayne, but give him a different name, give him a little bit different. Don't get sued, but use that as your starting point and then just run with it. And that's what I got to say. Thank you.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And Batman is, and you're right. And then it's like Jason talked about Superman, that there's so many different versions of Batman. And I've always loved the Batman comics. And then the movie started coming out, and I don't think there's a single Batman I don't love. Like, Batman has always done it right. Superman, no. Superman is just Christopher Reeve and Henry Cavill. Those are the only Supermans Supermans in the world that are beautiful. But Batman, every single Batman movie that has been around since I've been alive have all been wonderful, beautiful Batmans.
And all very different takes on the story and the type of Batman and the type of hero and the actor. Everything's taken different. I mean, the one with Christian Bale was so much darker. The original was a little more campy. And so it's just so many different things you can do, and they can all come out great, you know?
Yes.
And I think you're free, by the way, to honestly, I don't care for the darker Batmans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I loved in the 80s, I loved Dark Knight for sure. And the animated version of that is great. But the super dark, grim dark Batman is not to my taste, but that's okay because not everything's for me, right? You know, and that's okay because they're going to continue to make a million different kinds of Batman. Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you want advice?
No, I'm done.
Oh yeah. Advice on writing. I actually wrote down a couple things like for young writers, and truly to start to come off of something that Manuel was saying. I like to start with the phrase, it's like this, but something else. You know, you take something that you already like Batman or Iron Man or Dracula or whatever it is. Or you know, it's like people were into Harry Potter, so they go, oh, you know, it's like Harry Potter but with Greek mythology, and that's how you get Percy Jackson, right?
Yes.
And that's a great place to start. And in fact, we were talking about this earlier, I encourage people to do fanfic. If you want to write about Batman and Bruce Wayne, just don't sell it, just do it. But I just now ordered because somebody offline suggested to me, they said, have you read Hawks Harbor? And I said, what's Hawks Harbor? This is an S.E. Hinton novel that is a Dark Shadows fanfic that she changed all the names. That's it. She just like wrote a Dark Shadows book and then changed the names and put it out. And in fact, in some prints of it, she missed some of the names. And so the original names are still in the global search and replace doesn't always work if you're not being super careful. And I find that one of the most delightful things I've heard in my whole life, that S.E. Hinton published a Dark Shadows fanfic as a novel. And it's waiting for me at the library. I'm going to go get it after this panel. And yeah, so.
I remember when that book came out, like when Hawks Harbor came out. I didn't realize it was a fan fiction.
I haven't read it, so I got to go get it. But yeah, apparently that's exactly what it is, which is just hilarious to me. And what in the NaNoWriMo concept, I had two more, which was do it wrong, meaning just write. You know, Aaron Sorkin has this phrase where he says, you tell yourself, okay, it'll be a better version of this, but here's the first version, just to get something down on paper and then go back and fix it. And finally, that today counts. And this is what NaNoWriMo teaches you, even though I haven't done NaNoWriMo, but it's the idea that in your goal to have something done by 2 months from now, today is an important part of that period. So that, because if I've got to do 50,000 words over the course of 2 months, it means I got to do 25,000 in 1 month, which means, I've got to do 12,000 in 2 weeks, which means that I've got to do 6,000 this week, which means that today I need to get about 1,000 words written. Today counts. Today is part of it. And that's the one thing that I would leave any kid with about, is that you can create something in just a couple of months if you start now and you do a little bit of it. So yeah, that's all I got.
That's all amazing advice. Because I know even me, like as I it's hard to sit down and say, I'm going to write today. So I always get really excited when kids, like at my campus, I do have a couple kids who will come and like want to share like what they're writing.
Yeah.
And I'll read it, and that, and everybody wants it. And I feel like I'm not, advice for me to give these beautiful, impressionable young minds. I'm like, oh my gosh. And they're writing, a lot of it is so raw and real. And like, I don't even want to say there's anything wrong with it. Sometimes I'm like, this is perfect just the way it is. But then again, they don't want that. They want some kind of like, constructive criticism and stuff. So I try to do that, but
that sounds hard. It does sound hard.
It's very hard because I really feel a lot of what they write is perfect. Like, I'm like, I don't want them to change this little voice that they're writing and this little, how they're doing it right now. Like, who am I to tell them this isn't good enough? You tell your editor to tell you that, because I'm not the editor for this, because I don't want to break hearts, because some of their stuff is just so great and I don't want to discourage anybody. So it is.
I suck at that, Margie, but I just wanted to say one thing you could do is, and you're probably better at this than I am anyway, so I don't know who I'm talking to, but me personally, I have a hard time saying anything negative about anything. But one thing I can do is go, listen, this thing right here, I really like this, and I think you should do more of that. And just, that's the best I can do, because I suck at the negative.
Me too, because there's nothing negative about it. Like, even any book that comes out, when people are like, they want you to give reviews, and if I don't like a book, I won't talk about it. But if I love your book, I will shout it from the rooftops, because I don't feel it's my job to bash a book. That's somebody's hard blood.
Do you guys agree? I'm pointing as though you can see the grid that I can see. But do you agree about that? Because I actually agree with Margarita about that. That if I don't really care for a book, I just don't post about it. Mm-hmm. Like I could never write a negative review in a million.
I never trashed anybody, not like that.
Yeah, same here. You'll never hear me say, "Oh, this person's work is terrible," or what have you.
Or I'll look at the positive. I mean, I've read some books that maybe the characters aren't really very believable, but the story's great. I mentioned this one thing with, there's a book called I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. The writing was great, but I hated the main character. I just did not like her, but she was supposed to not be a likable character. That was who she was, and it was known that. But it was one of those that was real difficult to get the book. But I tell them, even though I didn't like the character personally, and I go, the writing was so good and the story was so good, I still got through it. That was the big positive. And it wasn't anything negative. It wasn't that it was bad writing. The writing is incredible. The writing is great, but that's who she was. She just wasn't, the main character wasn't a likable person. It wasn't supposed to be. And we don't always have likable people that are the main protagonists in a book. Sure. So similar to that, pull out what's positive. I may find something to say, hey, your dialogue is great, or hey, work on this. But what I always tell the kids too is write, study how to make it better, write some more, repeat. It's like, you can always make it better. Don't assume you write the first time is perfect, because it's not. People who do this, who've done this their whole lives, we still write, 3, 4, 10 drafts, so it can always be better, and just learn when to stop, but make sure you don't just write and say it's perfect. No. Read, make it better, learn, use your resources available to you. So yeah, I completely agree. I've never be negative. I'll try to accentuate the positive.
Yeah, and you really can't be negative. Oh, sorry. Oh, you really can't be negative, because, like, maybe you may not like that book, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad book. It's just not a book that you would want to read. Somebody else could get that same book and say, "This is awesome. This is great. I get it. I know what the author, he or she, is trying to say." But it's just, because, that's why I think I really won't badmouth any other writer's work, because, I think it's aimed at somebody.
In my own work, I want my editor to tell me, this doesn't work, or this sucks, or whatever. That's what my editor's for, and my readers. I tell my readers, I chose you because you're honest. If something doesn't work, if something doesn't sound right, if something just flat out is not good, you need to tell me, because you're not helping me telling me it's perfect, it's great, but that's what they're for. That's what my readers, my beta readers, my alpha readers, and my editors for, to sit there and tell me what isn't working, because we as writers, sometimes we may not see it,
Yeah. I think that's all great advice, guys. Thank you. So, what made you all fall in love with books, and who were some of your favorite writers growing up?
I always loved to read. It was to me growing up, it was like, it's something I could just go there, and it was like a time where I could just sit, be by myself, read, and kind of, the way my mind worked is I would read the book, then I could kind of see it playing out in my head. And it's like pictures, and I would try to draw them, and so they all kind of like they're all linked together. The drawings, the storytelling, the reading, they all kind of merge together. Now, by growing up as a kid, I always loved it. I've said this before. One of my favorite writers was Joe Hayes. I love Joe Hayes. I think, to me, he is the best storyteller out there. I mean, you go on YouTube, you type in Joe Hayes, and you will see like beautiful just renditions of La Llorona and all these different stories. And the way he flows from English to Spanish, It's almost like poetry.
Hmm.
You know, so and for older, I get books or older books. I love Denise Chavez. I love her books. Make me laugh. They make me cry. The first story I read from her was from an anthology, and it was about a wedding, and everything bad that could happen in a wedding happens on that day. He goes, I think there's a scene where she says, they say something along the lines of, they say that your wedding day determines pretty much what your married life is going to be like. Well, there was a tornado watch all day in Piedras Negras where her stories take place. And that story made me laugh. It made me cry. And I love the way she would pick the characters. Like they would like family arrives. Oh, how you doing? Hugs, kisses, for that whole bit. Then the minute they walk away, can you believe how fat he has gotten? You know, and it was just like so real. The characters were just so real. And then that led to me reading Face of an Angel, Last of the Menu Girls, and my personal favorite, Loving Pedro Infante, which is just it's her the story. It's a tribute to strong women, but it's also a tribute to her love for Pedro Infante, because he is. And it's like, you know, Pedro Infante had the point is made in the book. He had the reputation of being this really great. Everybody loved him. Terrible when he came to as a woman, you know, to women, could not be faithful, but everybody loved it. He just had that charisma. And he said, and there's a part that everybody has their Pedro Infante. That person that is bad for you, you know, is not good for you, but there you go. You know, but there you go. You know, it's like those two were two of my favorite writers.
I read that book by Flashlight. I remember because I read it at night, and I would read it because I love my Kindle, and I'm a big Kindle reader. But sometimes I like to read my book, and that's how I used to read as a child, as a little girl, under my covers in the book. You know, because you go to sleep. Okay, we go to sleep, and then you had your little nightlight on your bed. At least I did, and I love that. That's what I always think about whenever I read. Whenever you talk, I read it like that. Yeah. I love that book too. Okay, next, Manny.
Younger, I would read Hardy Boys. I read, I think, every single Hardy Boy book that was out there, even some of, and I even read, I read Nancy Drew. I don't remember who the author was because I think it was, I think there were a couple of different authors did it under a pen name.
That's right.
Yeah. And so, but Hardy Boys, I read anything and everything there was, and I said I even would go read Nancy Drew because it was in the same, same universe. Yeah. But the first big fantasy book I read was, and I got it, I think it was, if I remember right, it was at a school book fair. I got A Wrinkle in Time, Adam Lange, and that was my first into fantasy, and that was my favorite book for many, many, many years. That was my absolute favorite. And as I got older, you had The Outsiders and you had all those, but that's when I started reading Stephen King, started reading a lot of darker stuff, and got really into horror movies. I had older cousins that would sneak me into a drive-in to watch horror movies, and I was hooked after that. So I read a lot of those. So King, Anne Rice, and those were the things. But it's funny because as much as I'm into horror and supernatural and I love fantasy. Read The Hobbit, read The Lord of the Rings a little later. My favorite book of all time is To Kill a Mockingbird. I've read that one probably 5 times. I don't normally reread books, but To Kill a Mockingbird, I've reread The Outsiders a few times, but To Kill a Mockingbird is still my absolute favorite book. It's just perfection. I just absolutely love it. My son's in his last year at law school. I said, "You need you to be Atticus, just like cooler," but that's it. And as I've gotten older, it's more Neil Gaiman. I got more into Anne Rice, and Neil Gaiman's one of my favorite right now. I've been for a few years. And so, but a lot of King and Rice stayed kind of the same, and we just lost Anne Rice, unfortunately. But I read a majority of her stuff, and but there were 2 of my favorite authors. And growing up, that's majority of what I read. Like I said, I read horror pretty young age, horror and supernatural kind of things. But I love fantasy, and again, those are pretty much some of my favorite authors.
Awesome.
Same thing as Manuel. It was the 80s, so I think there was a dearth of young people books, really, at least in the libraries I went to. So I was reading a heck of a lot of Twilight Zone magazine, which published original fiction every month. And I mean, man, I was into that. I mean, I loved short stories, horror short stories. So they did have the scary stories to tell in the dark. But I mean, at that time, because I was in Central Texas, they didn't really renew the books very often. So there were still like 20-year-old Alfred Hitchcock collections on the shelves, and I just loved short stories. And then yes, I got into Stephen King, starting with his short stories in Twilight Zone magazine, and then definitely the Anne Rice, because there was a girl I knew who got me into those, and all the horror writing at the time. Nothing. It's funny; those are very well written, and I think Anne Rice was a beautiful prose writer, and Stephen King, he engages in something that I call just invisible writing, where you just lose track of the fact. I mentioned the event horizon. You just trip over it, and you lose track of the fact that you're taking words in. You're just taking in a story. I probably stuck with that stuff. Maybe this is a limitation of myself, but I really loved something that you could just lose yourself in and not even realize you were reading. So the whole idea of beautiful writing and beautiful sentences didn't even really, that just wasn't a part of what I was taking in literature at the time. Yeah.
Well, guys, it's coming to that time, and I just want to say you guys are some of my favorite male writers that I've not only had the pleasure of knowing and privilege of knowing in real life, but you guys write some of the most amazing stuff, and I'm really happy that we're able to share these books with boys and with girls. So thank you so much for being here today and for taking the time to talk to our kids here and on the RGV border. I'm hoping everybody all over the world watches this, of course, but we do this we try to get our kids here in our area who aren't exposed to a bunch of authors and writers, in their lives. So thank you so much for being here. And hopefully next year we can go live. And I would love to have you guys back in person at the beach. I'm convinced it's going to be at the beach. So I'm going to ask Brownsville if they'll host it next year. So thank you guys so much.
Well, the honor is all mine, and I'm very thankful to have been able to spend this hour with you guys. Thank you, and thank you, Margie, for putting it together. And I can't wait to see you guys live.
Yes. It was good to meet you, Jason.
Good to meet you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Margie, as always. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, guys. We'll see y'all next year.
All right. Sounds good.
Happy reading.
Bye-bye.